I was standing above the earth. I don't know how else to describe it. I was positioned somewhere above the surface, and below me, spread out like a living map, was the Middle East. I recognized it the way you recognize a face you've studied for years. I teach history. I've stared at that region on classroom walls for 2 decades. The Fertile Crescent, the ancient empires, the modern fault lines. I know every curve of that geography, but what I was seeing wasn't on any map I'd ever used in a classroom. There were columns of fire rising from the ground. Not one, not a dozen, hundreds. And they were not random. That's the thing I keep trying to explain to people when I tell them what I saw. The fires were not chaos, they were deliberate, coordinated. Like someone had drawn a blueprint and the earth itself was executing the plan. I could see Isfahan clearly. I could see the coast, the narrow passage of the Strait of Hormuz, and the water there was not calm. It moved as if it knew what was burning around it. The fires rose and the smoke climbed, and below me, the whole region looked like it was being remade. I didn't know yet what I was seeing. I didn't know yet why I was there. I only knew one thing with absolute certainty in that moment. I had been brought to this place for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was not small. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 47 years old. I'm a high school history teacher from Ohio, married for 22 years, 2 adult children who have their own lives now and call on Sundays when they remember. I am not a prophet. I am not a pastor. I am not someone who has ever claimed to receive visions or divine messages. I go to church on Sundays because my husband goes, and because after enough years of anything, it becomes part of the rhythm of your life. I pray before meals because that's what we do. I believe in God the way most people in my community believe in God, genuinely, but without much urgency. Faith is background. Faith is habit. The week before what happened to me, I'd been watching the news every night. Operation Epic Fury, the strikes on Iran, the footage from Isfahan, the diplomatic fallout. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my husband, watching the coverage, and feeling something I couldn't name. Not fear exactly, not the predictable political anxiety. Something quieter. Something that felt almost like a question forming in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite put words to. Is there any logic to this? Beyond the geopolitical calculations and the strategic analysis the commentators kept offering. Something else. Some underlying order. Some reason. I went to bed that night not knowing how to finish that question. 3 days later, I collapsed in the kitchen. I was reaching for a glass when my knees gave out. My husband found me on the floor. He told me later that I was unresponsive, that he couldn't get a response from me at any level. He called 911. The paramedics arrived and they could not get a pulse. They worked on me for 8 minutes before the defibrillator sequence finally restored cardiac activity. 8 minutes without a heartbeat. 8 minutes. I arrived at the ER already stabilized, but with no memory of the ambulance. No memory of the driveway, the street, the hospital entrance. The last thing I remembered was reaching for that glass. And then, nothing on this side. Dr. Alan Reyes was the attending physician that night. He's 52, ER veteran, the kind of doctor who communicates with controlled efficiency and doesn't speculate. He reviewed what the machines had recorded. He confirmed it in the chart, 8 minutes without a heartbeat, 6 minutes of confirmed brain activity cessation. He ran the follow-up assessments looking for neurological damage because after that duration of deprivation, neurological damage is what you expect. He found none that he could document. I asked him later, after I'd come back, after I'd told him fragments of what I experienced, I asked him if he could explain it. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "The data is the data. The chart says what it says. What happened during those minutes is outside what I can speak to." His discomfort told me more than a confident answer would have. What happened during those 8 minutes is the reason I am telling you this. I left my body without drama. That's the first thing that surprised me. I'd always assumed, in the abstract way you assume things you never actually think through, that dying would feel like falling, like a violent separation. It wasn't. It was more like a door opening into a room that had always been there, just on the other side of something you couldn't see through. One moment I was on the kitchen floor. The next moment I was somewhere else. And I was still me, still aware, still in possession of every thought and memory and feeling. but the body was gone. The first thing I registered was the silence. I have never in my adult life experienced silence. A classroom is never silent. A household with teenagers is never silent. The news cycle that runs in the background of modern life, the notifications, the alerts, the ambient hum of appliances and traffic, it's all so constant you stop hearing it. You don't know it's there until it's gone. In that space, wherever I was, there was none of it. It wasn't just a hushed room or a low murmur, it was silence. Absolute and total and unlike anything I had ever encountered. It pressed against me like a presence in itself. I expected fear. I felt none. That disturbed me more than fear would have. The peace that came with that silence was not earned. I had not done anything to deserve stillness like that. It arrived anyway. Complete, unasked for, the most disorienting sensation of my life, precisely because it was not what I should have felt given where I was and what was happening to me. Then there was light. Not the blinding white light I'd read about in the accounts that other people give. Something different. More like the absence of shadow than the presence of brightness. A quality of illumination that had no source I could locate. No direction it came from. Everything was simply visible. Clear in a way that ordinary light cannot achieve. And then the map appeared. I was suddenly positioned above the earth, and I recognized what I was looking at. The geography resolved beneath me. Not abstractly, but with the specificity of a teacher who has pointed to these places 1,000 times on a classroom wall. The Middle East. And it was burning. The fires were not what I had seen in the news. On the news, the strikes on Isfahan, the military footage, the satellite imagery. Those were events reduced to a screen. What I was seeing now was the same sequence of events, but I was seeing it in a dimension I have no word for. I was seeing it in a dimension of meaning. The fires were physical, yes. I could see the columns of smoke. I could see the specific locations I recognized. I could see the Strait of Hormuz where the water moved differently than water should move. But underneath the physical event, woven into it like structure beneath surface, I could sense something else. Purpose. I lacked the vocabulary for it, but I could sense it the way you sense the logic of a proof before you've worked through the steps. Something was being accomplished here that went far deeper than what was visible. And then the fires slowed. Not extinguished, they were still there, still burning. But they became still, as if paused, as if arranged for me to look at them clearly. The entire vision held itself in suspension, and I understood. Without anyone telling me, without a voice or a sign, I understood that this was not accidental. I had been placed here above this burning map for a specific purpose. Someone wanted me to see this. Someone wanted me to understand what I was seeing. I just didn't yet know what I was supposed to understand. That's when I became aware of the presence behind me. I turned, though turning is not quite the right word for what I did. In that space, movement happened through intention more than through body. I became oriented towards something, and when I did, I was aware of a figure. Indistinct at first, lacking the sharp edges a person has in ordinary light. What I was aware of first was the presence itself. A weight that was not physical weight. A gravity that pulled toward it, not my body, but my attention, myself, everything I was. And then I heard a voice. Before I could see anything clearly, before the recognition came, I heard the voice. It did not have volume in the conventional sense. It did not sound the way a voice sounds when it travels through air and arrives at an ear. It was more like the voice was already inside the space where my awareness was. Already part of the environment. The way the silence had been. It carried authority without force. It had the quality of something that has never needed to raise itself to be heard. The recognition, when it came, was not visual. I did not see a face and identify it. The knowing arrived the way you know your own name. Not because you worked it out from evidence, but because it is simply part of what you are. I knew who was standing before me the way I knew that I existed. Without deliberation, without process. Just certainty, sudden and complete. Jesus. He said, "Do you understand what you are seeing?" I said no. And in that space, there was no pretending. There was no softening of the answer into something more credible. I simply said no because I didn't. I understood the geography. I understood that what burned below us was the Middle East, that the fires were the strikes of Operation Epic Fury. I understood the physical events, but the meaning beneath the surface, that thing I had been sensing without being able to name, I did not understand. He said, "Then I will show you." What he showed me took shape in 3 layers, 3 interlocking purposes beneath the visible event. He revealed them not as information downloaded into my mind, but as a kind of seeing. Each layer visible the way a transparency becomes visible when light passes through it. The first layer was removal. The March strikes were not geopolitical calculation that God was tolerating or working around. They were a dismantling. Not primarily a military dismantling. That was only the surface. Beneath it, something else was being taken apart. A specific architecture of spiritual opposition operating through Iran's religious political systems. Systems Jesus connected to the ancient resistance described in Ezekiel 38 and 39. A confederacy aligned against Israel in the last days. The fires below me were not only physical fires. The strikes were removing something that had been blocking a prophetic sequence from advancing. Blocking it the way a dam blocks water that needs to flow. The fires in this layer of seeing were acts of divine permission, not human strategy permitted by God. Divine architecture executed through human events. I had no words for what I was feeling in that moment. Not awe exactly, something larger than awe. The sensation of watching the world from the inside of a plan you didn't know existed. The second layer was realignment. He showed me what the removal made possible, not peace. He was precise about this. Peace does not come immediately. What comes is a reconfiguration, a shift in spheres of influence, alliances, webs of power. What the strikes created was a geopolitical configuration that had never existed in exactly this form before. And then he showed me the Strait of Hormuz again. That choke point is not incidental. A third of the world's oil supply moves through that narrow passage. When it becomes contested, every nation on Earth feels it simultaneously. Every economy, every household that pays for energy, suddenly connected to the same strip of water. What the disruption created was a moment of global simultaneity. Every nation watching the same point at the same time. That simultaneous attention is required. The next phase of the prophetic sequence needs the world watching the same place. The realignment creates the conditions that the next event requires. The third layer was the one that stayed with me the longest. The third purpose was a signal. For those with eyes to see. He used that exact phrase, the same one that appears in the Gospels when Jesus speaks to those who can understand what others cannot. For those with eyes to see, March 2026 functions as a timestamp, a marker embedded in the sequence of human events that identifies exactly where humanity stands on a timeline written before these nations existed, before the borders were drawn, before the languages that name these places were spoken. The people who can recognize this signal are called to a specific posture. He was as clear about the absence of fear as he was about immediate peace, and he dismissed political reaction entirely. The events are too large and too architected for policy to alter their outcome. The posture he described was preparation, spiritual preparation, an orientation of the inner life toward what is coming, not toward what is already happening. He put a question to me. It wasn't rhetorical, nor was it a metaphor for something else. He looked at me, and in that space, being looked at by that presence was unlike anything I can describe. It was the sensation of being known completely. Every year of private doubt, every prayer said from habit rather than conviction, every Sunday morning that was more social obligation than genuine encounter. Being seen by that look and not destroyed by it was itself a kind of revelation. He put the question to me directly. Are you ready? Not. Are you afraid? Not. Are you surprised? Not even, do you believe? Are you ready? And I understood, in the silence after he asked it, that he was not asking about my readiness for death. He was asking about my readiness for what comes next, for what the signal announces, for the phase that the removal and the realignment are making possible. Then the vision shifted. It became smaller, more focused. What had been geopolitical became personal, and the transition was so abrupt it was almost physical, a change in scale from the largest possible view to the most intimate one. He turned the conversation from the Middle East and the prophetic sequence to me. Sarah Mitchell, a history teacher from Ohio with a quiet faith and a kitchen floor and 8 minutes that changed everything. He told me I was being sent back. And I need to be careful here about how I describe this because the word chosen carries implications I'm not equipped to carry. That's not what he said, and it's not what I understood. He told me that what he had shown me required a carrier, someone who could hold this message without it being filtered through the expectations that come with religious position. He said, the people who need to hear this are the people who already feel it. The people who watched the news footage from Isfahan and felt something beyond political anxiety, something that felt like a question they didn't know how to form. They already sense the signal. They don't yet have language for what they're sensing. You are their language, he said. He gave me a charge. It wasn't a formal commission or a prophecy to deliver. It was a testimony to share. Go back, he said. Say what you saw. Serve as a witness rather than offering doctrine or a political forecast. Speak as someone who was shown, not as someone who worked it out. That difference matters, he told me, to the people who will hear it. And he gave me a phrase to anchor it. Something specific. Something I was to return to at the moment when the account needed to be grounded. I won't tell you what it is yet because he didn't give it to me at the beginning of this account. He gave it to me at the end of what he showed me, and I'll give it to you the same way. I came back to my body with no warning. One moment I was in that space, still holding everything he had shown me. The next moment there was light. Not that luminous, sourceless quality from the NDE space, but the harsh fluorescent white of an emergency room ceiling. I became aware of beeping, of voices, of the particular smell of hospital disinfectant that I will never again be able to encounter without thinking of what I came back from. Dr. Reyes was there. And before I had fully oriented to where I was, before I had taken in the IV in my arm or the heart monitor attached to my chest, I said something. I asked about the news, about Iran, about the strikes, about whether the Strait of Hormuz was still disrupted. The nurse who was in the room looked at my husband. My husband looked at the nurse. Dr. Reyes, who had stepped in at the sound of my voice, looked at me with the particular expression of a clinician who has just encountered something his training did not prepare him for. He noted it in my chart. My first words upon regaining consciousness were about geopolitical events I could not have been watching during my cardiac event. He wrote it down because it was data. Because a physician like Dr. Reyes documents what he cannot explain rather than pretending it didn't happen. He cannot explain it. He told me that when I asked him. He said, I can document what happened. I cannot explain what you experienced during those minutes, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The first hours back were not peaceful. I want to be honest about that because accounts of NDEs often end with a description of calm transformation, of the person returning, suffused with serenity and compassion. What I felt was urgency. It bypassed panic, presenting instead as a pressing, almost physical insistence that I had to capture what I had seen before the specificity faded, before the details that were still crystalline in my mind blurred the way dreams blur when morning erases them. My husband brought me a notebook. I filled 4 pages before I rested. The geography, the 3 purposes, the question he asked me, the phrase he gave me, the private theological doubt I had carried for 20 years, the quiet background uncertainty about whether God was actively involved in the chaos of modern history, or whether faith was just a framework we applied after the fact to events that moved without divine guidance. That doubt was gone. It didn't fade through theological debate or yield to new evidence. It was simply gone, the way a question disappears when you've stood inside the answer. What replaced it lacked the usual warmth of certainty. It offered no comfort, no reassurance. What replaced it was responsibility, the weight of having been shown something and having been told to say it. So I'm saying it. Here's what I was sent back to tell you. Here's the phrase he gave me to anchor this testimony, the thing he said at the end of what he showed me, the sentence that I have carried from that hospital notebook into this account. What you are watching is not chaos, it is sequence. The strikes in Iran, the fires over Isfahan, the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, the global attention that is being forced by economic dependency onto a narrow strip of water in the Middle East. None of this is chaos. It is sequence. The removal of a specific architecture of resistance. The realignment of regional power into a configuration that the next prophetic phase requires. A signal, functioning as a timestamp, identifying where we stand on a timeline written before these nations existed. March 2026 is not an accident of geopolitical history, it is a marker, and the question he put to me standing above the burning map, looking at me with that complete and knowing attention, he is putting it to you now through this testimony. Are you ready? Not. Are you afraid of what's coming? Fear is not what this signal calls for. Not. Are you politically prepared? Do you have your analysis? Do you have your preferred narrative for how these events should be understood? Those frameworks are too small for what is actually happening. Are you ready? This is the invitation. It bypasses panic and political reaction, calling instead for intentional spiritual positioning. To orient your inner life toward what is coming, not just toward what has already arrived. The people who can recognize this signal are being called to preparation. And the specific question he asked me, standing in that space above the burning map, that question has been in this testimony from the first word. You felt something when you watched the news footage from the Middle East. Something beyond anxiety. Something that felt like a question you didn't know how to finish. That feeling is recognition. You're sensing the signal. You don't need me to tell you whether this is real, something in you already knows. The question is only whether you'll respond. Are you ready?